It's correct on the web page. He had it printed out. So.
So good afternoon, everyone. You've heard already this week quite a bit about the alliance agreement and partnership between SNIA and OFA. First, it's great for me personally to be back at an OFA conference. I've been involved in my prior life when I worked for Intel with the OFA organization all the way from its beginnings 14 years ago. Mark Carlson will be covering a little bit more on the alliance and the mechanics and how we're going to collaborate and move forward remote persistent memory. And myself, Michael Oros, I'm the executive director for SNIA. Part of an alliance and working together is getting to know one another and what we do. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time, just 5 or 10 minutes, giving an overview of what SNIA does, who we are, and what are some of the work items that are on the horizon for us, even beyond the alliance that is in place with OFA. So we're a global organization focusing on storage, standards, technologies, and education. About 170 or so companies around the world that are part of, that are members in SNIA, 2,500 or so active individuals from those companies that participate in SNIA technical work, education, and other activities. And overall, a footprint of over 50,000 storage professionals and IT professionals and press and other influencers around the world that we reach. It's kind of interesting. I just looked at our YouTube viewership data alone for the month of March. We had over 91 countries that was actually consuming our content around the world. So just to give you a perspective on a little bit on who we are. In terms of our vision and mission, you've heard the fun conversations during your own town hall about your own mission and vision and how that will evolve. In terms of SNIA is to be the globally recognized and trusted authority for storage leadership, standards, and technology expertise. So when you think storage, we'd like you guys to think of us in terms of a resource where you can bring your problems, ideas, opportunities, and things that we can work together on as an industry to move them forward. In terms of our mission, I won't read it for you verbatim, but it's there. One of the key changes that we made in the last 2 years is really a change in some of our terms and definitions, what we focus on, and you'll see that reflected in here, that we look at how do we facilitate that efficient management, movement, and security of information. And part of that movement and the access to it, working with OFA on the remote access to persistent memory, which is one of the new areas of development for SNIA. Again, we've been working on persistent memory technologies since 2012. Now it's looking at how do we add value and bring that technology to modern day applications that exist across multiple, not just a single system. In terms of all the areas which we have activities in, standards development is the most obvious. We do something beyond just the standards development itself, but we actually submitted forward to become ISO standards, to become international standards around the world. We do also work beyond standards and work on open source software. We have mechanisms by which we have open projects that cross boundaries beyond our membership and facilitate participation from everyone in the industry on those topics of interest that are in that domain. Of course, when you do standards and specs, you do have to ensure, and there's more than one vendor implementing it, which is obviously our goal for the work that we do to be mainstream. The next step is how do you ensure interoperability. So we have sets, various mechanisms, a technology center actually here in Colorado Springs to be specific, where we host PlugFests and have a series of conformance tests for technologies that demand it or make sense for. Not all of them, depending on the life cycle that they are, require things such as conformance testing, but we have a extensive experience and variety of options at our disposal. In terms of technology acceleration promotion, one of the aspects is really how do we accelerate solutions for problems that vendors and companies in the industries have. I'll give you an example to dispel the myth or idea that standard bodies are slow and kludgy. Our time to first spec on Swordfish, which is our storage management, one of our new storage management specs, it was 8 months from the time we got started on it to when we published the first spec. And we have groups within SNIA that deal with form factors and connectors that have moved through from beginning to a published spec in as little as 5 months. So we have experience. Our objective is to be nimble in the industry, responsive to your needs, and provide the best possible solutions for the industry to collaborate. We also have in our charter a objective or mission for vendor neutral education. How do we educate the industry on new standards, new technologies, and part of that is ensuring that we have commonality in language when we speak to one another. We have something that we still print, believe it or not. It's still in demand for print today, what's called the SNIA Dictionary, which is, for more lack of a better description, an encyclopedia of storage terminology. And that covers the networking aspect of storage as well. We have a certification program that we run as well, where we certified storage professionals around the world in a vendor neutral way, as well as conferences, much like OFA does here today. We have a storage developer conference in Santa Clara. This year will be last week in September. I encourage you to participate, as we traditionally have had multiple topics that are relevant to OFA as part of that developer conference, as well as 2 international developer conferences, one that was held for the first time in EMEA this year in Tel Aviv, and in India as well at the end of May. Very briefly, the areas of focus that we cover, quite broad, ranging from cloud to data security management, physical storage aspects. I mentioned the form factors, connectors group that has joined and become part of SNIA almost 2 years ago. It'll be 2 years in July. Persistent memory at the very top of that tree, the blooming and growing part of our technology portfolios and areas of focus. We fully expect to be adding more to that category in terms of the work, some of it direct outcome of the conversations we've had here with you this week. We do focus on power efficiency and measurement as well. The EPA and other organizations in Europe, Japan, and around the world utilize what's called the SNIA Emerald spec. Take that and essentially turn it into the formal government specs. The importance of this is really an example where instead of the industry being regulated by the government, although it has regulations in place, we came together to facilitate the definition of what are the right measurements and metrics and how should that be done. And then that was handed over and done in collaboration with the government, as opposed to simply having it be dictated to the industry. Specs in next generation data center, network storage, obviously it's part of our name, and storage management are other key aspects and fundamentals for SNIA. The next slide really takes that same picture and gives you a view of specifically what are things in 2018 where we have active projects. Those are listed there. I don't expect you to read them from the back of the room, but this presentation will be posted. And again, as mentioned on the previous slide, at the top on persistent memory, we have a couple of projects that are identified and ongoing, including the remote persistent memory and a high availability white paper, which is one of the use cases that was discussed this week, and I anticipate we'll be adding more there. And with that, the alliance agreement has already been announced, but I will ask Mark Carlson, the co-chair of our technical council, to come up and give you more of a perspective from a SNIA view and how we can continue to collaborate and work with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. So, this was a slide that Divya did, and Paul did it. I added a couple things. One is oops. No, wrong button? There's a laser. There, okay, barely see it. What SNIA is promising to do as part of the agreement is publish early releases of our standards, our white papers, and really any technical work that applies to OFA. And that allows public viewing of stuff that would normally be locked up inside of SNIA and available only to SNIA members. So as we get stuff, probably a little bit more frequent release than we would normally do, but just so that you guys can see what we're working on step by step by step. The other thing that SNIA has is what we call a feedback portal, and this allows us to accept contributions on documents that will become a SNIA standard. And we have an IP policy process that makes sure nobody can game our specs. And the feedback portal is a way we can accept external contributions from people that aren't under that IP policy, but still ensure that they're not in there gaming our specs. So that's one of the processes. You guys probably don't need your own feedback portal because it's just a pull request kind of thing, right? All right. Oh, far right. Yeah, okay. So, and this is something that kind of modification of what Paul brought into the group to start this whole process. It's a convergence of storage and memory for sure, beginning in a single server environment, and that's pretty much all the hyperscalers have. But also, remote persistent memory is kind of this different animal, right? So extending, those memory semantics over fabric is something you guys are already working on. We just want a model that matches that. And so if there's implications up on the programming and application usage of this, we want to put that in the model. And then we need to leverage the persistent memory technologies to get the high availability in addition to the durability we get from the persistence. And so we're hoping that these complementary efforts in OFA and SNIA can move this whole space along, and between your open source and our open standards, create and elevate this whole market. So the high availability use case is one that we've already published a white paper on. And so we're going to pick that up, Doug says. It's our plan of work. And we're going to work on a better sort of enumeration of that use case. But also there's this remote shared memory use case as well, where not necessarily anybody has the persistent memory locally. Everybody's accessing it remotely. So That's kind of something we want to pick up. And then in our collaboration, SNIA wants to extend the persistent memory programming model to support this remote persistent memory and promote the libraries that support remote persistent memory, such as the PMDK that Andy talked about yesterday, I think it was, or maybe the day before. And then on your side, you've got the framework and definition. API has been talked about all week. And, somebody's going to implement that both on the networking side as well as the persistent memory side. So here's the link to the high availability white paper that we have now. And please give us some feedback on what is out there right now, because we're going to go work on this and create a new, version 1.1, for example. And we want to add some of the error handling that comes up when you are doing this remote access to persistent memory. There's a whole bunch of errors that can crop up now that we don't have in our model. And then we have this other white paper around atomicity, and I think it was Doug or somebody was talking earlier about transactions around persistent memory, and that's going to have to take into account the remote operations as well. So you've seen this a couple times this week, so I'm not going to really go into what we're talking about, but we really want that data to go from the application to the persistent memory device, and then, if required, go off and make it highly available. It could be that this just goes straight into the RNIC and you're accessing remote persistent memory from this application. But the semantics shouldn't change here, other than now you got to worry about connections. You're going to worry about connection failure. You're going to worry about slowness. You've got to worry about out of order stuff. So consistency is very key. So applications just want to be able to recover from failure, and that requires this robust local and remote error handling. And it's going to involve application involvement. What we mean by that is he's going to have to understand the semantics that this thing isn't in the same box as him, necessarily. And this is a problem that's been worked over computer science for decades, right? And then atomicity of aligned fundamental data types. And this is something that we're just now starting to get into, is like, what are the compiler support for persistent memory? If you have fundamental data types in there, is that the granularity of atomicity that you really need? If you have a persistent object now sitting in persistent memory, is it the object itself? Is it the parameters in the object, or what? And then the failure atomicity, what we mean by that is, what is the sort of blast radius during a failure? And how does that affect the atomicity guarantees that we want to make? All right, so ending up with the SNIA slide, of course, Michael. I'm not going to make you come back up here. But, this is the pitch to join SNIA, as well as OFA. Get involved in the standardization process directly. You wouldn't have to go through the feedback portal. But it helps us as spec writers to have you guys as stakeholders in this whole process. We'll get a better spec, and it'll be more implementable and hopefully more interoperable as well. All right, questions? And Michael, you can come up here to answer questions too.
comprehensive, huh?
Yeah, it's mostly review. And plus there's a break next, so I want to get to the break.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure being
Yeah.
here this week with you and kicking off our alliance and the great conversations since Monday night and throughout the week. Look forward to the wrap-up tomorrow and our continued work. Look forward to seeing you throughout the year and continuing to work together. Thanks.